Hello, JJ here from IAB Australia. We've had a few questions and inquiries from members over the last few days regarding the news in Europe in relation to the TCF. What is the TCF, you may ask? Well, that's a transparency and consent framework that's been running for a while now in Europe and recently launched in Canada, in order to enable consumers to become aware of and opt in or out of targeted advertising, depending upon the different legislative requirements of the market that you're in. GDPR has been in effect now for more than 5 years, so this is a long-standing industry solution for sellers, buyers and vendors that IAB Europe have been running now for a long time, and various different versions of the framework have been released. The original version V1 was obviously the first that was released, and this is the version that's been interrogated legally, technically, philosophically by various bodies and DPAs across Europe. We're now on version 2.2. In fact, version 2.3 is out for public comment, which is something that's released and managed by IAB Tech Lab, which is the technical arm that manages various standard specs and software to enable digital advertising, supporting all the IABs, but honestly all the markets globally across the world. So the legal decisioning that's been we've seen in the last 2 to 3 years, first of all, is in relation to version 1, not the later, far more mature, and the level of capabilities of the more recent versions of TCF is really a world apart from version 1. The decision not only isn't the legal perspectives are not only to do with version 1, but the outcome from last week ultimately deemed that TCF is legal with a few minor changes. So the minor change is actually largely that IAB Europe has to become a vendor, one of the vendors in its own vendor list for the framework, which is slightly odd, but this is because the TC string that's utilized to capture consent and pass it on through the ecosystem is deemed personal information. This led to a fine of the framework, which is version 1, going back a few years, which in effect is kind of fair enough. If it's deemed PI, then that wasn't working, and there's a reason for that fine. But to understand that the TCF is perfectly legal, the update is a very quick one. There's nothing for anyone utilizing the TCF in Europe or Canada to do. There's no ramifications, nothing actually changes. If anything, we should look forward to version 2.3 and the benefits for everyone of that. Now, in terms of the impending legislative changes coming here in Australia, this sounds a bit cruel, but it's kind of true. The pain that Europe's gone through in the last 4 or 5 years, the level of interrogation from every angle possible, actually fills me with enormous confidence that it's now at a level of maturity for us to adopt here in Australia in the coming years, once we know what the requirements are. It's been so tested in every manner that we can honestly benefit from that. So thank you, Europe, and thank you, Canada. So in short, TCF is legal, it's very workable. Some of the language around the decisions and the outcomes are very confusing, so I think there's been some misunderstandings. And most importantly, we need to do what's right for the industry and what's right for consumers moving forward. So all in all, we're in a good place on that one. And the other areas to consider for us is how we weave into the standards and the expectations that we have actually in terms of transparency through, for instance, the programmatic supply chains for which we have specs and standards, and in relation to the data and transparency of that data, how it's collected, how it's stored, how it's managed, what it's utilized for, the recency, and all of that. And that's part of something known as data label. So with the myriad of these different options as an industry body, we feel we're doing as much as we can to prepare and do the right thing for both industry and consumers here in Australia moving forwards, once the hard collaborative work needs to be done. I hope that helps. We're going to put this video on an article page. There'll be some useful links there. And if you ever have any questions, particularly of a technical nature, please reach out. And yeah, thanks very much.